The hard question becomes, how do you care for 1.4 billion people while still making what I call room for non-human Indians? And my definition of Indian is quite different from most people. Elephants and tigers, squirrels, all of these are non-human Indians. They don't have a passport, they don't have citizenship, but they've been around as long as we have or longer. I feel like a lot of global attention in wildlife goes to Africa and South America and doesn't get to Asia enough. 1,000-person solution in North America has to be a 1,000,000-person solution in India, and we're better at designing those. It's not a question of how do we do it, it's when can we do it and are we going to do it. And there is an urgency to this, and unfortunately I think in our field, when you kind of repeat the same urgency, people kind of zone out. You're always seen as crying wolf. Tourism is important, but it cannot just be tiger tourism in this country. I think scientists are still not respected and valued for what they bring to the table. Wildlife in general, now maybe a few people think it's interesting or it's different or cool, but if you are related to somebody in the field, there's just this perception that you're crazy, you're out there doing something, you don't make a lot of money, and what value is this to society that you're going and studying some rare frog for 6 years of your life and getting a doctorate. You're running a startup with no financial payoff to the people giving you funding. There is no profitability, there is no going IPO, there is none of this, right? It's important for society, it's important for India.
What worries you most? Hi, welcome to the We Women Project. Today, I'm accompanied in this conversation by India's foremost wildlife conservationist and a very respected global voice in biodiversity. I have Dr. Krithi Karanth, who is the CEO of Center for Wildlife Studies. Thank you, Krithi. I think the work that you've done across the last 2 decades in kind of bringing people and animals together and thrive is truly very inspiring. And it's not only us, I think the world is recognizing you today. The first South Asian to get the Rolex National Geographic Explorer award. Is it an award? Is it a recognition? So hearty congratulations, and thank you so much for taking the time out to do this for us.
Thank you very much for having me, and I'm very excited.
As we get started, I think wildlife was not new to you, right? You grew up in an environment that had wildlife. Your father is legend. Can you tell us about your growing up years? What was it? You know, were you in the jungles all the time? How did it feel?
So I am very lucky to have 2 incredible parents. My mom, Dr. Krithi Karanth, and my dad, Dr. Ullas Karanth. Raised as an only child with 2 very busy parents who were deeply committed to their own careers, which meant that I had to kind of be kept occupied, and my mom traveled a lot on work, and so I ended up spending a lot of my childhood in the jungle with my dad because she would leave me with him when she traveled.
Okay.
In those days, you could take your kids to the jungle, and so my dad did exactly that. Starting at age 1, he started taking me out into a lot of national parks and wildlife sanctuaries, initially just in Karnataka, but over time to other parts of India as well. Very strict parent, my dad was, still is, I guess, and learned very early on that you had to wake up at a certain time, be ready, otherwise you'd get left behind. I never got left behind in 17 years of going to the jungle with him. And yeah, we would go out and I would have to sit quietly, not allowed to take anything to keep me occupied for 6 to 8 hours in a day, other than a pair of binoculars and lunch. And we would sit in watchtowers, watch animals for hours. He actually made it fun and gamified it very early on, where can you spot something before I did? And there was always a thrill if I saw something before he did. And when you start that at age 1, even today when I get into a watchtower, or I'm sitting in a jeep with my own kids, with my own colleagues, I'm still trying to be the first one to spot something. So that kind of led to an extraordinary childhood of just spending hours and hours and hours watching animals. I didn't really want at that point think of becoming a scientist or conservationist. That came much later. But the joy of being in nature, joy of being in stillness, learning to just be patient, because most of the time you see nothing. The few seconds and minutes that you do get to see something is absolutely thrilling, and 46 years of doing it, the joy is still there.
Yeah. So you never complained, you never rebelled. There was
With my dad, there's not much room to complain because,
Okay.
yeah, so I had to just,
Just comply.
just shut up and be there and be present. And there was no option. I don't think my own kids would survive this today if I subjected them to it.
So when did the switch happen in your mind actually? When did you start enjoying it? When did you start relating to it?
In the sense that if you asked me as a kid, I knew as an adult I would always come and enjoy being in nature, yes, but not as a professional, more as a tourist, right? When I was doing my undergrad at the University of Florida, I was trying to figure out what I wanted to specialize in. I started out with a focus in microbiology, realized very quickly that I didn't want to be in a lab, I wanted to be in the field. And by the time I got to do my master's at Yale, for that you have to design a research project, and I found myself designing a research project in India. So I came back and worked in Bhadra Wildlife Sanctuary for a whole 4 months. And that's when the realization came that both wildlife science and conservation is very complex. There's a lot of challenges in India, and having been lucky to be exposed to some of the finest scientists and conservationists through my dad, for a while I felt that, most kids don't want to follow what their parents do. In my case, it was, I think, similar, but I realized when I was doing my own research project that there's a lot of questions to ask, there's a lot of research to do, and I could do that, and there was room for
you
many
could create
people.
your own space, and you could create
so
your
I
own
start,
path.
and then by the time, so this happened around when I was 22, 23, and from then on, now,
there's been no looking back. Can we actually, for our viewers, just talk about, the work your dad did? I think he was one of the instrumentalists for tiger census in the country.
I mean, my dad is considered one of the greatest tiger biologists in the world, right? He was the first Indian to collar tigers. Along with many other brilliant scientists in the US and India, figured out methods that were scientifically accurate, not just for tigers, leopards, bears, wild dogs. And so he truly one of India's, I think, scientifically rigorous approaches to studying wildlife. And he nurtured a lot of other people. I mean, he started very late because he himself switched from being an engineer to being a farmer to a wildlife biologist. So in his books, he didn't get started till he was in his mid 30s. In my case, it was in my late age one, but not by choice, by age 19 by choice.
So what does a conservationist do, or what does a wildlife biologist do, if we have to break that down for a layman?
So they're very different. I think a wildlife biologist is a scientist. So there is a more professional path to the career. Most people today, you have to have an undergraduate degree and typically a master's. That's just the starting point, right? And then if you're really passionate about being a scientist, you do end up getting a PhD and, continuing on. So there is a very formal education pathway to becoming a wildlife scientist. And fortunately today, earlier all the options were outside India. We're very lucky today that you have terrific undergraduate and wildlife master's programs in this country, and now we ourselves run a PhD program. We founded one of the master's programs, right? So there's a lot of opportunity for young people to study this formally. The path there is very research focused, so you are going to spend time in the field. For some people, it's a specific animal. Could be a lion-tailed monkey, could be gaur, could be some rare frog in the Western Ghats, and their entire life gets dedicated to understanding a species. For some people, it's larger things, using satellite imagery, remote sensing to look at changes in the landscape and land use and how that affects wildlife. For some people, it's asking evolutionary questions on how something's evolved, right? So there's a core biology grounding, but increasingly in the field, you end up using a lot of statistics and a math. And if you're more interdisciplinary like I was, I also ended up integrating geography, economics, and the social sciences into the questions I asked, right? So that's I would call it a more straightforward path to becoming a professional scientist. I think conservation, anybody can be a conservationist. There's no formal training, very little formal training available. It usually starts out with somebody growing up somewhere and say, there's a river that's polluted or there's an animal that's in trouble. It starts more from an activism, more of there's something wrong around me, either with the environment or people are frustrated or an animal is in trouble, and you get actively engaged and you start speaking up. There is more room for all kinds of people to become conservationists, and whether you want to be a local or a regional or an international conservationist, really up to you. I think there are very different skills that come into play to be successful in conservation. Fundamentally, I think if you're good with people and you like interacting with people, you're able to engage with the government, you're able to engage with the politicians, you're able to
get things done,
speak publicly, right? And so I think the skill sets are quite different. And I think the beauty of being a conservationist is there are no barriers to it, right? If you truly feel passionate about something, you can self-educate yourself, you can find mentors and get involved.
How does India's flora and fauna look to you? Like, how would you define it as we stand today?
So one thing which I think a lot of Indians don't appreciate is there is a world classification of countries that are rich in biodiversity.
Right.
They're called mega diversity countries.
Okay.
India is one of the 17 of almost more than 196 countries in the world. Most Indians don't realize that we're holding on to very unique biodiversity that has evolved over thousands and thousands of years of evolution, even before people got to the subcontinent, right? And so that makes us special. I think the real challenge is the fact that you have 1.4 billion people, of which at least 1 billion people whose lives are still difficult, challenged, and so you have to uplift these billion people while trying to make space for nature. At this intensity, there's no other country facing this kind of challenge right now, right? China has more space than us. China's already uplifted more than 1 billion people into the middle class. So in that sense, very little space for wildlife. Less than 5% of India's land area is formally protected for wildlife. If you look at functional space, it's probably 1 to 2%. So then the hard question becomes, how do you care for 1.4 billion people while still making what I call room for non-human Indians, right? And my definition of Indian is quite different from most people.
I'd love to hear that.
So for me, it is, Indians are not just human, right?
Yeah,
you could be a butterfly, you could be a
non-human Indian is the first time I'm hearing that.
So I use this a lot. And I'm like, elephants and tigers and,
that's so lovely.
Squirrels and, all of these are non-human Indians, and they don't have a passport, they don't have citizenship, but they've been around as long as we have or longer.
You bring up such a valid, I think this must be the most important conversation you continuously have at various panels, but how do these two worlds, where do you see conservation move in the future, or how does this coexistence happen?
So in some sense, as humans are stewards of nature. Our brain capacity has given us advantages that other species don't have. And the decisions we're making on a day-to-day basis on how to use and manage the environment affect all other life forms, right? And I think there's a few people who care very deeply. Maybe in the public's imagination, yes, tigers have showed up, elephants have showed up. That rare ugly frog or that beautiful butterfly is not there in most people's minds, right? How do you build that connect to nature? How do you build a society where you value other forms of life? I think in our case, we do have an advantage. It's a combination of, I think, having a rich history of animistic practices, cultures, Hinduism, Ahimsa, Buddhism, Jainism. There's already, it's not just religious, I think religion, culture,
practices.
Food, practices, and going back well before formal religion came, right?
Yeah.
We do have a connection to nature. It's celebrated deeply in all our lives.
Yeah.
We just have to make that a reality, I think, in richer ways.
But things like urbanization, things like, the real world problems that is going to eat into the biodiversity spaces, how can it be countered? Can it be countered at all?
Absolutely. I'm saying 95% is left for humans, right? So that 5%,
Yeah, protect the 5%.
Protect the 5%. There's a lot of wildlife that don't occur in formal protected areas, whether you're talking about the Great Indian Bustard, talking about wolves. A lot of our formal protection was established in forested areas. You look at grasslands, you look at wetlands, there are many other habitats are classified as wastelands in India, right? Our definition of what is valuable is varied. And so we have to expand the work we're doing to non-forested areas, have to look at species that are not found just in parks. And there are many examples of in the world where you can have cities that provide for lots of people without impinging further on wilderness, right? And it is a call you need to make. There are countries in the world that have, smaller countries, yes, like Bhutan and Costa Rica, which have 30% of the country in wilderness, right? It's not like people are not, needs are not being met. So it is a question of how do you create space for wildlife, and yet we have enough resources, we have enough money, we have enough technology. It's not a question of how do we do it, is when can we do it and are we going to do it?
I think when it has to be now.
Now, it has to be now. And there is an urgency to this. And unfortunately, I think in our field, when you kind of repeat the same urgency, people kind of zone out after a point. And so that also becomes a challenge with most environmental and wildlife movements, is that you're always seen as crying wolf. What is the real urgency? What has
can
time,
wait,
right?
what needs
But
to.
we are at a very interesting point in India's wildlife history. Overall, the picture is a mixed bag. In some parts of India, wildlife are thriving, but in many parts of India, they're in deep trouble. And we can't have illusions that zoos are going to solve this problem. That you need wildlife to live in wilderness.
One thing that struck me when I heard you speak was that you say that children in the periphery of the forests don't view it in awe anymore. The access to wilderness or the access to this biodiversity, and that's an area that you work on.
We've spent about 2 decades, more than 2 decades now, looking at human-wildlife interactions, right? And there's a spectrum there of neutral to positive to extremely negative. And I think for us, growing up when you grow up in an urban area, you either see an animal in a zoo or you see an animal on television. There is a sense of awe. And then when you actually see your first tiger in the wild, or a wild dog, a pack of wild dogs, whatever, you're blown away by the beauty of all of these animals, right? The reality for people who are growing up in villages around these parks is very different. When you have a herd of elephants coming through and destroying your crops year after year after year, you see the stress experienced by your parents, you see the stress experienced by your families, and then it's not elephants are amazing kind of perception, right? So I do worry that repeated conflict and negative impact from wildlife means that people's attitude will turn. We're very fortunate that there are very low rates of human injury and death. When they do happen, some of it is accidental, some of it is deliberate, and it's devastating both for the animal and for the human being. Yeah, and then once you've experienced something like that, if you have a family member who's injured or killed, you're going to perceive this differently, right? And so and every human being has a different limit to tolerance.
And things like this is becoming so common, like even in Bombay, you have the leopards coming in, you have
and they're living off people's dogs because there's not enough wild prey now, right?
Correct.
And so what are the places where you just cannot have this, and you can't just expect people to solve this. This needs actually people with professional abilities to intervene and say these are the places that are priority for humans. You can't have large animals coming and injuring your pets and putting your children at risk. And these are places where wildlife needs space, and if this involves making hard calls.
So if you infringe, then you are going to
and this you're seeing this everywhere, right? As urban spaces becomes peri-urban then gets into edges of parks, this intensity of interaction is only going to grow up.
Where does the buck stop, Krithi? Who takes these calls on ecological boundaries, safety?
I mean, right now, the decision and the management lies with the government. It is a very heavy expectation that the government, through the forest department largely, supported by other departments, has to manage the park, has to manage anti-poaching, has to manage fire, has to manage conflict. There's just a lot of expectations of what one government department has to do. And I think in India, we've been lucky that there's a lot of civil society organizations, NGOs of different kinds involved in trying to help solve the situation. I don't think it can be done by one set of people. It needs a lot of collaboration. It needs a lot of actively reacting to stuff depending on the context, right? And it's a very large country with a lot of wildlife still left.
That's a positive note. So there are a lot of conservationists. I mean, I started with the conservationists. So you see that population also growing actively in India?
Yeah, I think, I mean, this is natural, right? As people become more aware, they're going to care more. And I always say that the biggest advantage we have is the fact that there are more people interested in both in environmental issues and wildlife issues.
Understood.
And are willing to speak up and fight for a particular place or something they deeply care about. And as generations evolve, you're seeing this even with younger generations. I think the frustration seeps in when, you keep raising your voice, you try and change something and the system pushes back, and then you start to see only negative things happen. I try and be an optimist. It's very hard to go down a pessimistic road. And so that comes with some wins and some losses, right? But you can't just be losing all the time.
Right. So, but you have to cut the noises to stay the course. I think there's no other choice, right?
I do think something that I wish people had told me when I was younger, this is a lifetime commitment. I know it. You have to be extraordinarily resilient. Things will keep going up and down, and enjoy the good moments. Can't solve all of the problems, but if you don't engage, then things are going to go, right? So really have to be gritty and resilient, because the number of knocks you take in so many different contexts are always going to be there.
Coming back to your own story, Krithi, so you went to Yale and then you came back and you said there was a space for you to create your own. So how did you choose the area that you wanted to work on? And how did this work around CWS build? You can give us a little bit.
Sure. I think I've been doing this for 28 years. The first 10, 15 was very focused on being a scientist, asking interesting questions. And I was always interested in the applied nature of wildlife. So I was never a pure biologist studying a particular animal. So that meant, I looked at things like human-wildlife conflict. I looked at wildlife being found outside protected areas on coffee farms and rubber estates, looked at tourism and its impact, looked at connectivity. So, and now looking at, illegal wildlife hunting and trade and wildlife diseases. So there's always an angle of collaboration and working with somebody who's an economist or a public health specialist or a geographer. And so the research has always been very applied in the sense that you ask a question, you find some answers, and what does that mean? What does that mean for that place? What does that mean for policy? How does it help shape what comes from it? So it doesn't become, I did a research paper, published a bunch of books, but nobody read it and had no real world impact. So the applied nature of the work actually makes it easier to have real world applications and insights that can be used, right? But for me, I came back to India 16 years ago, again, focusing on the research side of it. But after about 2-3 years of being here, I realized that the work wasn't helping change reality on the ground for a lot of people who we were talking to, right? We were doing surveys on conflict in villages. And that's where I think the motivation came to start designing conservation programs. And Wild Save, which is our longest running program now, was the first one we launched. And it was founded with the idea that we know there's a lot of human-wildlife conflict taking place in India. We're very fortunate that the government has ex gratia compensation available, but our research showed that less than 30% of people were filing claims. And we did research in 3,000 villages in India. So it was not in one corner of India. We worked in multiple states. And we realized that this was a simple thing. Compensation is not everything for a family, but the ability to show up and help them when they're in crisis or repeated crisis makes a huge difference in how they view the animal and their potential ability to retaliate or not, right? So we started this program originally just in Karnataka. It was only in Bandipur, Nagarhole, And interestingly, we picked 2 parks which have high densities of tigers and leopards and elephants, but they also have very high conflict right outside, right? So in retrospect, it was good picking them, because if you can solve at that intensity, then places which have less conflict become easier. For a long time, we were just in the 2 parks. Today, the program's in 36 parks in Karnataka, Kerala, Tamil Nadu.
Nice.
And we plan to grow it into Goa and Maharashtra, which spans the entire Western Ghats, and hoping to start the work also in the Eastern Ghats. It's taken a while, it's taken a lot of patience, but we know how to implement a conservation program, right? And Seve was the first one. After that, we developed the conservation education program Wild Shale, which works with school children. Then we did Wild Surakshe as an outcome of COVID, because we realized that frontline health department, forest staff, primary health center, veterinary center, they didn't know how to manage wildlife conflict. They were not aware of all the wildlife diseases. And so that's now a very, it's actually our most scaled conservation program. We have worked in all 70 wildlife parks of the Ghats, Western Ghats. We're now working in the Eastern Ghats. We're in police training academies, fire force academies. We're in of course, forest department academies, and we're working with all the frontline stakeholders of, if there is an issue around a particular area, all of the people whose decisions and ability to act affects the future of wildlife, right? So it's a completely outreach training program. I think long term will give everybody the ability to act when a situation's not right.
Sounds phenomenal. Sounds like such a massive amount
so
of
we've now
work,
gone.
right?
We have 6 conservation programs. Some in just 2 parks. Some in all 70 parks, or going to 100 parks, right? And so that has completely shifted my sense of doing and having impact. And I think the third shift came about 8 years ago, where in some sense, I refounded Center for Wildlife Studies, which my dad had set up in '84, but had been jointly run with another organization. And we stepped away and became an independent entity 8 years ago. And I had to rebuild from scratch. At that time, I had a team of 15 people. Today, and we were just working in Karnataka. Today, we are 150 people working in 8 states. And that has been an interesting journey, because going from a scientist to a conservationist is, I think, more natural. But when you have to run an organization and administrator, fundraising, media, it's a whole different set of skills. And although I did study and train professionally, all of this has been learned on the fly in some sense.
What drives you?
I just love what I do. I have always, I think I'm a very, I like doing many different things. So which is why having this role today works for me, because I don't just work with scientists. We have amazing scientists. We have an amazing PhD program at CWS. But I also work with an outstanding set of talent on our media and outreach team, from illustrators to writers to photographers to filmmakers. And so that diversity makes life very exciting, because no day is like the previous one or the next one. And I get to meet people. I get to meet people from so many different walks of life. It's very enriching.
Yeah, I hear you. So if you had to take, if CWS had to take a new park and start from scratch, so what's like the prototype? How would you approach the diversity?
So I mean, prototype is still first do research.
Okay.
You're not going to walk into some place and
know what to do.
No.
Okay.
So I think, and the research, getting some baseline sense of what are the wildlife found and what are the threats and challenges to that. And then understanding the human context. Which are the communities living here? What is their dependency on the park? What are their perceptions of the park? So unless you build that baseline work, you're not going to be able to actually think of how to.
And how long will that take? A good research?
A few years takes
okay.
I mean, if you're trying to do interdisciplinary work, which is not just the biology side of it, but also the human side of it, it does take several years to understand a particular place. Biological principles are the same. It's the human diversity that actually adds to the excitement.
And then you will have a list of recommendations that you will work on to implement?
No, it is figuring out in this place what is the problem, right? And it's not the same problem everywhere. In some parts, it is this habitat fragmentation, it could be development of infrastructure or mining, those kind of really big challenges. In some places, it could be conflict. In another place, it could be hunting and poaching, right? Or other challenges, right?
Yeah.
So, and in many places, you have a lot of them going on in parallel, right? But so it is really like very much like a physician diagnosing a problem before you start intervening with medicine.
And then you have to work with parallel communities
Yeah,
and
and
then
you
bring
have to
them all
work with the
together.
government.
And you
I
have to
mean,
work with the government.
I think initially that I found that very hard because it takes a while to build a relationship with the government, right? And government is from panchayat to district level officials to state to center, right? And patiently we've been doing it. I think we're getting better at doing it, and they're the biggest stakeholder in all of this, right? So I think organizations like CWS play an important role. But you have to figure out how to collaborate, particularly with the government.
So, you have struggled your life through 2 continents, I think. A large part of it you've spent in the US also. Your association with the Duke has been
I did my PhD at Duke and I'm still a professor there.
And you're a very respected global voice in biodiversity. So when you see it from the outside in, how does that look to you? At one end, you're doing so much of groundwork. You're leading a lot of groundwork. But when you compare...
No, I think I'm very blessed having spent time both in the India and the US. I've had different advantages to them, right? When I showed up as an 18-year-old in America, I was just Krithi. There was no Karanth tag. So there was no, your father is this, and your grandfather is this. None of it, right? It was incredibly freeing to just be seen as a person, and you build your identity, your ability. Actually gives you a lot of strength. And I always say the US made me fearless and supremely independent. And when you go at such a sort of formative age, it becomes more so, right?
Yeah.
And also the academic skill sets I acquired there. They're similar to India, but there's a lot of it is still intellectually very, very stimulating.
Freewheeling thinking,
Independent thinking, critical thinking, ability to ask questions freely, not worrying about what society thinks. All of these things I think become an asset as you grow older. And I was lucky that I spent 13 years there. But my heart was always in India. This is my home. This will always be my home. And so even if I spent that much time there, I always wanted to. This was, there was a tug.
You always knew that you
No,
had...
when I went there, I didn't know whether I was going to come back or stay. Ended up making a very hard call when I was 31 and moving back to India. And it was the best decision I made. Like, it was a very gut call. People thought I was professionally, by then I was doing my postdoc. I would have well on track to being a tenure track professor in a good academic institution in the US. But something didn't sit right there. And when I came, I had no affiliation. I just and no organization hired me. I was just working independently originally for 3 years, right? If you have the strength of mind and you have the skill sets to raise money, to think of projects, do the work, eventually things will figure themselves out. I don't think the part I really thought or planned for was running an organization one day. It was more, let me do meaningful work rather than through the lens of an org as opposed to an individual and a team, right?
Understood.
Which are very different things.
Very, very different. What is, like, if Krithi had a superpower, how would you define what you bring to the table today? You've nurtured so much talent. I think, you straddle a large team. You've enabled
boundless energy. I just have boundless, and people are like, do you ever get tired? I don't get tired. Okay. And I'm very persistent. I'm very, very, I don't give up. And actually, as the older I get, the more knocks that come my way, my ability to stand up is also faster. So I think, you make mistakes, you learn from those mistakes, and then now I feel like, it's a good space to be.
Good space to be. The fearless, boundless energy. Fearless 40s. Krithi, like CWS, how many institutions do you think exist in the country working on wildlife in parallel today?
If you formally count, there's probably 10 to 15 organizations of a size and scale where there is enough impact. There are lots of small organizations, and one thing we're trying to do at CWS is we run this wild incubator research and tech program where we are raising money to give out to organizations smaller than us, right? And there we are the typically a CWS scientist or conservationist is a mentor to the org, and we fund them for a year or 2 years, and then we help them think through what they want to do and give support, right? So I think there is a role to play in building out the ecosystem. I don't think we have enough organizations or people in the field. We need many more people and many more organizations tackling the scale of challenges we have today. And it's an interesting role shift from us raising money for ourselves to do our work to supporting other people doing important and interesting work. And I think that's also needed. And that's something we're starting to really prioritize at CWS.
You have a team that does most of this?
Yeah,
Like
150-person team,
people,
of which
right?
I would say 100 people, 120 people are on ground doing either science or conservation in different parts of India. And then, typically small, finance, accounts, HR teams, but that's less than 10% of the org.
My exposure to wildlife, Krithi, is limited to, when I go in for safaris, when I, go into one of these parks. And it's exhilarating, yes. I also agree that spotting that animal for those few seconds is extremely exhilarating. But many times I come out of the park wondering, because if you see a tiger, there are about 10 jeeps that, pile up right there, honk, fights. You see so much human drama more than the animal in these parks that sometimes I shun away from it.
Yeah.
But at the same time, conservationists say that, tigers that are tracked, tigers that are in the park area that's visible are more protected than the ones that aren't. So, this dichotomy, what are your views?
So I think, if you look at wildlife tourism as a whole, there's always this debate of how much tourism is good, right? My support for tourism comes from the fact that seeing an animal live in the wild is not comparable to seeing something in a zoo or seeing something online, right?
Yeah.
So everybody must have an opportunity to, if they want to go see something in the
So
wild.
you recommend
right?
it?
Yeah, but I think the challenge today in India is that if you look at wildlife tourism, a lot of it is tiger-centric tourism.
Yeah.
So the 55 tiger parks are besieged with badly behaved tourists, too many jeeps, not managed well, and they're seeming to be adding more and more vehicles and more routes. And so the kind of situations that you just described is happening across India in a lot of the premier tiger parks, right? And they don't, for most people, I don't want to see a tiger surrounded by 60 jeeps, right?
Yeah.
So rethinking tourism to not being just tiger tourism, but getting people to look at other animals. And I think the other component we miss is if you're able to hike or walk or sit in a watchtower, those are very different experiences than sitting in a jeep, right? Yes, there's a element of risk which is higher when you're hiking and walking, but in a lot of wilderness areas, particularly if you're not in elephant country, you can do this safely. And walking in nature or sitting in quietly and observing from a watchtower are things that will do
Wonders
to all of us if we got more opportunities. And as scientists, we get permits that allow us to do experience nature in these other forms. So I think tourism is important, but it cannot just be tiger tourism in this country. It has to grow and evolve. And what does being in nature mean, right? In a lot of parts of particularly Europe and US and even South America, people go camping, people go hiking. There are other ways to absorb tourism that's not defined by one species, right?
Right.
Actually, a lot of birders, they, I think, really experience nature because, the way they go seeking experiences is very different from somebody who goes on a tiger.
Can you describe to us, some of your exhilarating moments in the wild, in wildlife, some of the sightings you can never forget?
Oh, there's been both exhilarating and terrifying as well.
Okay. Yeah, you can tell us
I think,
both.
when you're doing field work, particularly in parks which have elephants, you're always on red alert, right? So when people ask me, do you get scared? When I'm walking on foot, we never do it alone. There's always 2 or 3 of us together. It's not coming across a tiger or a leopard that worries me. It's actually coming across an elephant or a bear, because all of the few incidents where I know people have been injured had to do with elephants or bears, right? And I've had at least three instances where you've just been walking in the forest and you've
Where was this?
in Bhadra, in Nagarole, in Bandipur, where you've suddenly come across an elephant. The animal's not expecting you. You're not expecting to see the animal, and then suddenly, yeah, you have to turn around and run, and you're just running helter skelter, and it's pretty scary, right? But I've also had amazing experiences where, walking in Kerala, we saw a tiger on foot at 200 meters, and the amazing thing was there were four of us walking up this, not even in a trail or a path. We were just walking up a road, and we saw this amazing tigress, and she was about 200 meters away. And lucky for us, we saw her before she saw us. And so we actually got to watch her for a few, not maybe a minute, not more than that. And suddenly she turned around and she looked at us. But and then two of us coughed. We can do that with big cats, and then she just jumped and went into the forest. Right, we never saw her again. Right, so it is also training to know what to do when you see different kinds of animals, and there are also amazing sightings where I've had amazing luck where I would say as a child I would spend a lot of time and see very little, and now pretty much every time I go I see something, right? And the last 3-4 trips I've gone, and I'm particularly with my kids, seen a lot of sloth bears, and actually sloth bears are pretty hard to see, and we've seen cubs riding on their mums' backs. We saw in one case we were in the jeep, we're driving down a hill, and we saw a sloth bear dart into the bush. We didn't see the face, we just saw the body, and suddenly you heard this roar and all this tussling, and we were like, what's going on? And probably ran into a tiger. We heard a tussling for a while. Neither animal came out, and then suddenly we saw this huge bear climb a tree, and I had never seen a bear that size climb that quickly, and the bear sat on the top of the tree. We never saw the tiger. And for about 10 minutes looked around, and then when it was safe came down and went away. But it was really funny because we kind of drove the bear into
the tiger zone, into a sleeping tiger.
And they had some kind of, luckily it didn't end badly, but everybody was taking everybody by surprise.
Right. These predators are scared of the bears? They push them back?
No, tigers and bears are known to fight, and they're pretty evenly matched, so it doesn't always go the tiger's way.
What other biodiversity does India carry, Krithi? For the uninitiated?
We have, more than 1,400 bird species. We have more than 400 amphibians, more than 400 reptiles. And I think the birds and the mammals get all the attention. People are still discovering new frog species in the Ghats. People are still discovering, lots of insects and other kinds of species, right? And so I think for young children, the emphasis on nature, appreciating nature, should be on exploring and discovering rather than I have a checklist and I have to go check that tiger off, check the bear off, but not pay attention to the smaller features.
You've been repeatedly saying this actually. Is there any conservation that is happening on that front, like tourism, that herping? Is it called herping?
Herping, yeah. Is it not at? I think people who want to do it have to dig
deeper and figure it out, find ways to do this. So we step again back to a little bit of a global scenario. How is conservation possibly in an Africa or in the Amazon or a South America? Can you give us a little bit of a flavor on that?
Sure. I think what I envy about my colleagues who work in other continents is that they have a lot more space and a lot more time to protect their wildlife, right? So your millions and millions of acres of land in South America, in North America, in Africa. When I talk about, our parks, which are 300 square kilometers, 500 square kilometers, and we're like trying to save this many large animals, it is very, very extraordinary. I've had the privilege of going to see a lot of places, particularly in Africa now, and it's just the vastness of the land, and there is a sense of these animals are also in trouble, but they have time and they have space to solve this, which is where the envy comes in, right? And so I feel like in India we have to work a lot harder and a lot quicker.
What have been some of the most frustrating moments in this journey for you?
I think, broadly, I think scientists are still not respected and valued for what they bring to the table. And it's not just biologists and wildlife scientists. In general, as a society, science in India I think at one point there was a lot of prestige to being a scientist, and there was a lot of respect that you're professionally trained and your years and years of getting a PhD and skill sets matter. I find it terrifying that in 2026 a lot of decisions are being made without using science and data as a foundation for this.
Right.
A lot of our decision making on big questions is based on who you know, not really grounded in evidence, which is a terrible way to solve any problem. Also, I think remains a challenge is women trying to break through this, whether you're in the corporate world, in the non-profit world. It just seems to take so much longer for women to do it. It's 2026. When I was younger, I would be more skeptical about this. No, women are getting more opportunities. Women are able to do stuff. And I don't think so, actually. I think I think we just need to work a lot harder to bring more women to the table, regardless of which profession you're in. The number of barriers people face is just so much higher. I'm very happy that our PhD program is 80% women, right? And it happened naturally. They did better on the exams, they did better on the interviews, and they were
Got
selected,
selected.
right? But I think we all have to find ways in which each of us is consciously looking at what are potential barriers and trying to remove it. And I think we have a long way to go. I still see women, very few women truly being respected for what they've accomplished for India, right? There's a lot of people stuck in the middle who just need
that push.
that push.
Yeah. Somewhere, this initiative is also to try and give that little bit of a push, a little bit of to people listening.
Yeah.
What do you think is like actively holding them back, at least in a conservation space, the women?
I mean, I think a lot of women who come into wildlife inherently have to. I was very lucky because of the parents I had at home, right? But I think a lot of women
choosing this path
have to fight their own families before they can get here, right?
Yeah.
And I see variants of it from people who've managed relatively easily to people whose families have basically disowned them because they chose this path, right? And that extreme end of
the spectrum.
So I think, we just have to create more pathways that facilitate this. It also, and in wildlife in general, now there's maybe a few people think it's interesting or it's different or cool, but if you are related to somebody in the field, there's just this perception that you're crazy, you're out there doing something, you don't make a lot of money, and what value is this to society that you're going and studying some rare frog for 6 years of your life and getting a doctorate, right? So I think there's still quite a bit of that. It is changing as more people emerge and talk about why these fields matter. But I think institutionally and in the public spaces, I mean, we're still tiny fraction of the conversation.
Yeah, we have a long way to go on that. So coming to your recognitions, Krithi, I think, very proud at what you've achieved, and at a global platform like the National Geographic. Tell us something about the award. Tell us why it is so prestigious.
So I mean, it's been now 12 months to the day. I have been lucky to be recognized by many people, but the last 12 months we've received 3, and I'm saying we because I see this as Team CWS, not just Krithi, getting these recognitions. Last year we were picked by the McNulty Foundation and Aspen Institute for the McNulty Prize. This is a global honor given to 3 organizations and individuals every year, and they've given 60 of them in the last 20, and we were the very first wildlife organization ever picked, right?
Wow.
So till now they were recognizing organizations that were solving human problems.
Understood.
And fully focused on people, and for the first time they have an org on. I was like, I'm glad you brought non-humans to the table. That's exactly what I said to them, right? So that happened last July. Then earlier in the year, in April, received the Royal Geographical Society Esmond Martin Conservation Prize. That's a prize that recognizes sort of large-scale research connected to conservation impact, and that kind of reinforced that a lot of the research we're doing at CWS today, and even our conservation programs, have evaluation and monitoring built into them, right? So it kind of reinforced that the science we're doing and the linkages to conservation are very strong, and so that was wonderful. And then most recently was the National Geographic Rolex Explorer of the Year. This is very personal to me because I became a National Geographic Explorer 15 years ago. And throughout my last 15 years, usually when I have a different or crazy idea, the first org I think of submitting an application to is Nat because they're open to crazy ideas, open to things that have not been done before. And they've kind of nurtured my own journey as I transitioned from a scientist to a conservationist and now running an organization. This is an honor they've been giving to one person or one group of individuals. We were the 16th to get it.
Oh, is it?
But again, being the first Asian, first Indian, it's both exciting, but it's also I ask, why did it take this long for Asia is a continent of 4.5 billion people, right? You have Chinese, you have Indians, you have Cambodians, Thais, Sri Lankans, and so just I feel like a lot of global attention in wildlife goes to Asia, goes to Africa and South America, and doesn't get to Asia enough. And I'm hoping when our work is highlighted, it showcases that we're doing very large scale, innovative science conservation that's relevant to this continent and then will become relevant to other continents.
Absolutely, right? Absolutely. It's absolutely brilliant. But what did they see in CW? What did they see in you, and how did that recognition come about, or how did the visibility build for a South Asian? How did the visibility build?
No, I think one thing, Vilasini, is whatever we do, whether it's the research papers they're published, we're publishing high quality science consistently on all our work. You see this as a moment in time, but for me, I see this as 28 years of being a scientist. More than 20 years of being a conservationist and now an institutional builder, right? And originally as one person, then a team, and now an org of 150 people. And that, if you do slowly, steadily, people do see.
You don't have a choice but to see it, because that's the way it's grown.
And you're seeing the outcomes of the work. You're seeing the impact that it's happening, that Wild Survey has now assisted 35,000 families with filing claims from 7,000 villages. You see Wild Chalet has gone to 1,600 schools and touched more than 100,000 teachers and school children, right?
Absolutely.
Suraksha has again reached more than 50,000 frontline workers. There are numbers, there's data, there's impact, and that doesn't happen in 1 year, 2 year. It takes years.
Any profession, I think you have to give in that 20-30 years to the cause.
And I always joke, actually, in my field, particularly in a city like Bangalore, where I think the emphasis is on young. In our field, the more years you put in, the more people are interested and value your time that you've put in, right? So there is value to putting 2-3 decades of your life in.
They have a museum in which your story goes up, is it?
Incredible museum of exploration that they launched on June 26th in DC. National Geographic has 6,000 explorers around the world, and after Americans, India has the largest group of active explorers today. So they have showcased, I think right now, exhibits from 70 explorers, including us, but also others. And I think it's a wonderful new place because it's not a static museum like a traditional museum. Because they have so many human beings doing amazing work, there will always be a rotational change on what is on display in the museum, right? And I think when kids go to a place like this and they see somebody's shoes, somebody's jeep, somebody's children's book, they realize that these are actually careers, whether you're a scientist or a photographer or a writer or an illustrator or a conservationist. These are all careers you can pursue, and this is a museum that celebrates that spirit of amazing human mind and all the good things we can get out of.
Yeah, sounds absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, you must go.
I must go.
DC is the city of museums, and there's one more spectacular museum to visit.
Who have been your role models, mentors? Who are the people you look up in this community?
Original mentors, I would say, are my formal advisors. So I had an incredible undergrad advisor, Dr. Mike Binford, who was a geography professor. I walked in as a 19-year-old into his office and I said, I want to do research. And typically no professors will give an undergrad time of day, and he did. For 2 years, I worked on a wonderful research project with him, and he was literally my first academic mentor. Then I had amazing advisors for my master's and my PhD, and then on I've sought my own advisors. I think the nature of advisors and mentors has changed. Initially, they were all wildlife scientists, geographers, economists. Today, I think the mentorship and the advice comes from collaborating with people. And particularly for me, actually now I look at our CWS Advisory Council deeply as my mentors. I have venture capitalists, I have an investment banker, I have somebody who was worked in the political space and in education. And these are all people who had very different life paths, have very different careers from mine, but they are foundational to how we've rebuilt CWS and how the org is moving forward, because they think differently. They ask very hard questions. And so the collection of mentors now is far beyond the wildlife.
So you went out, sought them out?
Yes, I sought them out. I found some by serendipity, and I've realized having people who are different from you is the best way to move forward. Yes, you feel extremely stupid at some points in time, but they also get you to think very differently than if you surrounded yourself with the same kind of.
You've mentioned fundraising 2 or 3 times. So I think, that's something I think I'm getting a sense that CWS has done well.
No, I think this, I mean, when people ask why, what stops you, it is literally not having the stability,
not having
of
the
money,
ability
right?
to, absolutely, any venture.
Yeah, right. So I think we've reached a point where a lot of the work we've done is now having impact, is visible impact, is innovative and scalable. Yet we have so much more we can do. And so the frustration is that, can we do more? And how do we do it in more places, work with more people? And so it comes down fundamentally to be able to raise for the work, right? And interestingly, the conservation work does appeal to people more because they see the impact, right? Is it a child? Is it a school? Is it a family? The science is not valued, right? And the fact that you have to do baseline work on understanding what the challenge is before you go out and intervene. So finding funding for science in India is very, very different.
And so what are the avenues? Like, you have grants, you have...
So we raise money from foundations, philanthropic foundations, both in India and the US. We raise money from, now thankfully, CSR and individuals who believe in, the cause and the unrestricted sort of freedom that somebody, suppose you say, go put it to where you think it should go, and let's see what happens. And that's led to a lot of very...
And this must be a constant need.
Oh, yeah. So I spend a lot of my time, fortunately or unfortunately.
Yeah, I get it. So it's almost like, you're running a startup of your own.
You're running a startup with no financial payoff to the people giving you funding, right? It is if it's a foundation or a corporate supporter, they look at impact. If it's an individual person, they care for the cause or they want to see something interesting, right? None of these supporters get anything from the work we do, right?
That much more challenging, Krithi.
So it is, there is no profitability, there is no going IPO, there is none of this, right? It is it's important for society, it's important for India, it's important for, that's what drives.
More power to you on that. Krithi, how are you as a person? What do you like? What do you enjoy? What does your downtime, if you have any, look like?
As a person, I love meeting new people. I love traveling. I love seeing the world. I love trying all kinds of food. But I also love time by myself.
Space,
right? And I cannot classify myself either in the traditional way as an introvert or an extrovert, because I live both lives. I wasn't a very patient person, so it's taken a lot to learn to be patient and to learning to become a good listener, because I'm the kind who wants to keep doing stuff, and luckily I have wonderful colleagues now who will say, listen, you need to slow down, catch your breath, while the rest of us
match up to whatever you're thinking.
And you can't push that much all the time, right? So actually it's good you make enough mistakes to learn that you have to bring people along with you. I have 2 wonderful children, so I actually love being a mom to these 2 girls. I don't see them as much as I would like to. And
how old are they now?
I have a 10-year-old and a 19-year-old.
Oh, okay.
So it's wonderful to see that. And I mean, I think the life I've lived, I've acquired a lot of friends who do a lot of crazy things around the world, and that is a great joy, just building out friendships, and not just in India but really around the world.
Across the globe. What does a typical day in CWS look like?
I don't have a typical day.
I should have guessed.
Sadly, I
Yeah.
don't.
Yeah.
I think I travel a lot. The travel involves going to the field in India and spending time with our teams. We run a lot of training programs. I make sure I show up for all of those because that's my touch point to all the work being done. Still love going out in the wild. Still like to make sure that there's 3-4 days of quiet, of getting to watch animals and talking to people we're working with, because that's the reality check on all the work. I love traveling internationally. I get called a lot now to speak at events and meet people in different parts of the world, and that's absolute joy. I do spend a lot of time. People laugh at me because I have 20-minute meetings, and if you want a 30 or 1 hour, I'm like, why? And so I get a lot of meetings jammed into stuff because I don't want to be stuck behind a computer just in meetings.
Yeah.
Meeting people for fundraising, meeting people for public speaking events, meeting people for collaborations and to build out the next project or evaluate a current project. All of this becomes life. I don't get to do primary data collection and analysis anymore, but I do helping through projects. I do help write up papers. Still feel very happy when my name shows up in a scientific paper. So there's a lot of, small
reason there through that continues to exist from
so the scientist in me will never go away.
So wonderful.
Yeah. And for me, I love collaborating, like I said, with filmmakers and writers and illustrators. So that brings great joy. When we're working on a children's book right now, we're working on another field stories book of CWS scientists. So that creative side gets nurtured.
When you're struggling so much, why did you choose the academic route also? Why did you choose to open up the PhD program?
Because I realized that not everybody is able to go to Europe and US to get this kind of education. We're very lucky that now we have a lot of good institutions that are producing, I would say, reasonable number of masters in wildlife. But from PhD perspective, there are not many places people can go to do a wildlife PhD in this country. So, my dad and Dr. Ajit Kumar set up the wildlife masters program which is now run at NCBS, and now you're seeing 25 years of that program's impact. But now if people want to become a PhD, get a PhD, where do they go? There's still very limited options. So this is something we started 6 years ago. And yeah, we have a wonderful program with now 15 active students, 20 people who have graduated, doing really exciting work in India.
The south and the north, do you see a large divide in terms of the way biodiversity is looked at or conservation is looked at? The south of India and the north of India.
Oh no, I don't think so. I was thinking global north and global south. I think something I pushed very hard on my talks that I gave at Royal Geographical Society and Nat Geo was that I think long gone are the days when Western knowledge, Western ways of doing things are brought to continents like Asia and Africa. One, they have to realize that we have our own knowledge systems, we have our own way of doing things. Particularly now, I feel with our work, we're innovating out of India, and a lot of this work CWS is doing is actually applicable and replicable by other countries in Africa, in Asia, in South America, and even the West, right? And so I feel we are now turning the tables on who generates the knowledge, who creates
on many
ways
levels,
of thinking.
and I think the global south
it's absolutely time for us as to hit hard on these things, and I do that.
Yeah, like CWS can be like if the Nat Geo came from the West to this, CWS can be the answer.
No, I think CWS is one, but there are many organizations and individuals doing this, particularly in India, really innovating, and not just in the wildlife space, but in the education space, in the health space. And the kind of solutions we are able to create because of resource constraints that reach millions of people. I always joke, right, that a 1,000-person solution in North America has to be a 1,000,000-person solution in India, and we're better at designing those, right?
Absolutely.
And so they have a lot to learn from us.
And is it well heard? Some of these
conversations? I think if you say it in the right way, it is well heard, and I think we are hopefully getting to a world where you are going to listen to people different from you and with perspectives different.
And how is it changing on the ground? I mean, how does any of this change on the ground in terms of funding, in terms of from a global perspective?
I mean, it's interesting. I find that in wildlife, we are sort of seen as very outgoing and very forthcoming in how we present our work. But I'm very clear on one, that we're doing deeply impactful work. We're deeply committed to these places and it's having an impact. So we are going to talk about it. And you can't have it both ways by saying people don't care when you don't talk about the work. That if you don't talk about why something is a problem and why you need to help, how do you expect somebody to help, right?
Absolutely.
So I think it comes from a place of pride, and also comes from a place of, people need to know that there's so much wildlife left to save in this country. And how do you get people engaged? By talking about it.
What worries you most? Is it pollution? Is it poaching? Is it government apathy?
What worries me most is, I think the next 20, 30 years, we're going to see a lot of changes in this country. And I don't think we're designing and solving problems fast enough and well enough. And like I mentioned before, it's not like we don't have the knowledge base or the funding or the resources to do it. It is working with different partners with the expertise, right? All knowledge is not housed in one entity in this country, right? So you have to build coalitions of groups of people working on stuff. And if we don't do it, we are going to lose a lot of amazing species in our lifetime.
What is the future of CWS? Where is it? Where do you think, all the work that you've brought in so far, where do you see that heading?
I think we have, I'm very excited. I think we are in at least having had to rebuild it in the last 8 years. There is a sense of, we know how to problem solve, and there will always be problems. Every year is a new set of challenges. But I think we have the resiliency and ability to stay grounded and be more ambitious in what we want to do. I'm not satisfied with where we are at today. I think we can do a lot more and train a lot more people, inspire a lot more people, involve a lot of.
If you have to go by outcomes, Krithi, what will that 1 or 2 outcomes be? Like, if you have to put it down in numbers.
So I would say our outcomes are, we are, say, in the next decade, deeply focusing our work on 100 wildlife parks. We do, our PhD students do research in 16 states across India. Some of the work we do goes to many more states, but the deep impact is the 8 states of the Western and Eastern Ghats. I think it serves as models that others can replicate and evolve and adapt to suit themselves. But when you work deeply on the ground in 8 states and 100 parks, in time that will show the outcome.
So we'll have a quick rapid fire. Okay, one word that describes Indian biodiversity best.
Complex.
Okay, one wildlife park that doesn't cease to fascinate you, or every time you go there you find something new to see.
Nagarhole.
And why?
The first park I went to, first park where I sat in a watchtower, first park where I saw my first tiger, my first leopard, my first elephant, my first every animal possible.
What is the one most misunderstood concept about conservation in India today?
I don't think people realize how much scientists, conservationists, and conservation organizations do. Success or failure is often attributed to the government, and I think there's a world of people involved in saving India's wildlife.
Camera or binoculars?
Both. But I usually pick binoculars first.
Okay. Summer safari or a night under the stars?
Very hard. I get a lot of summer safaris, so I would pick night under the stars.
Okay. What's harder, tracking a tiger or changing human behavior?
Changing human behavior.
Okay. Yeah, I think you have more to say.
No, just changing human behavior.
One wildlife conservationist you deeply admire today, can be in India or the globe.
I think the classic example who everybody refers to is Dr. George Schaller. And I would still put him on top of my list because truly was a pioneer who went around the world, first person to study tigers in India, pandas in China. In his 80s and 90s was chasing Tibetan antelopes, right? The man is just extraordinary. He's not as widely known as others. But in terms of really being a pioneer, I would put him on top.
One wildlife conservation or a biology book that you greatly enjoy?
So when I was studying in my undergrad, one of the courses I took, somebody gave me a book called Becoming a Biologist. It wasn't about wildlife. It was more about lab science. But it's a tiny little book, and I kind of go back to reading it every year because the guy just captures the beauty of why biology as a field matters and why being a biologist is cool.
It's so important.
It's cool.
Oh wow! There are so many documentaries on wildlife, right? That I've got to see, and so much on Netflix and many others. So today, if you had to choose content, which one would you choose, or which one would you recommend?
I actually have a funny confession to make. I don't watch a lot of wildlife documentaries.
Oh, nice. You get to see them in the wild.
Yeah,
So
and I've been part of some, and I haven't even fully watched the ones I've been part of. There's one I am excited about, which is coming out. It's a series called Home that National Geographic and BBC are doing together. For over a decade, they're filming all 6 continents and the beauty of all 6 continents. And so I'm really excited. It premieres this year with Africa, and next year will be Asia. I'm just really excited to see, because this took a lot to film around the world for a decade or more. It's not quick filming, right? And I'm just really excited to see what.
how are you associated with it, Krithi?
I am involved in the Asia episode because all of them feature explorers working in different continents, and yeah, so they have a little bit of a human element, but just I think the spectacular sense of what they've captured will bring people to tears.
But they have been doing such amazing. I mean, every output of theirs is.
But I think that is when you see organizations like National Geographic and BBC, who have been doing this for decades, continue to push on, continue to find new things to show us, and the beauty of how spectacular this planet is, and the challenge of trying to save the beauty of it.
Absolutely. And I think it's a seed of conservation at many levels for a common man.
No, and for a long time, I think they only showed the spectacular side of it. And now in the last 10-15 years, you've seen enough feedback given to say that it's fine to show an episode, but please show the conservation challenges that exist in this place, and who are the people involved on the ground trying to solve them. And so the nature of filmmaking and storytelling is no longer just spectacular, but also
It's
very
changing.
real.
Yeah. I've repeated this in the non rapid fire format, but if you had to say, if you had a wish for India's future in wildlife, what will it be?
Make space for non-human Indians.
Okay. Non-human Indians. I just love it,
Non-human
Krithi.
Indians matter. They matter.
Okay.
We're not, we're not the only Indians that matter.
Complete the sentence for me. Conservation to me means
innovation, ambition, collaboration, imagination.
Thank you so much, Krithi. I think it's been a fascinating 1 hour spent with you. Thank you for the time.
Thank you for the thoughtfulness and the depth of what you asked. It actually got me thinking about a lot of things nobody had ever asked me about. So
thank you so much. But before you leave, I just request that you give us a message, both for aspiring scientists, conservationists, and to women in all walks of life.
I think we live in an extraordinary moment in India's history where there's room for anybody to be a scientist or conservationist. I think there are millions of ways people can get involved in conserving India's wildlife and wild spaces. And particularly if you're a woman, find the strength, find the resilience, and keep going, because I think women are unstoppable.
I think looking at you, I think I have got a lot of energy today. So absolutely fascinating.
Thank you so much,
Krithi.